The Refugee Hosts International Conference, convened over 2 days in October 2019, was the culmination of a 4-year research project examining how, why, and to what effect local communities in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey have been responding to the displacement of people from Syria. The conference provided an opportunity to share insights from our research and enabled us to bring refugee hosts' research into critical conversation with others. These conversations both challenged and disrupted a variety of presentist and exceptionalist narratives and policy frameworks used in accounts of forced displacement, and enabled us to critically engage with questions surrounding the production of knowledge in and about forced displacement and hosting situations. Funding for the conference enabled us to address some of the structural barriers that often exclude specific voices from sites of knowledge production. However, although the conference provided travel bursaries, childcare, translation, and live streaming in Arabic, 3 of our colleagues invited to speak at the conference had their visa applications refused, demonstrating how the UK's racialised hostile environment towards migrants and refugees prevents and restricts the movement of certain people and their voices being heard. This conference highlight video presents some of the important conversations that took place on the day and includes a presentation from Dima Hamadmad, one of our Syrian colleagues who was refused a visa but who chose to participate through a pre-recorded video. It is these conversations and presentations and our continuing conversations that begin to challenge and address in some small measure the structural inequalities and barriers to participation in knowledge production around forced displacement.
To my untrained eye, and to my hasty eye, Yousif Qasmiyeh's poem, Refugees are Dialectical Beings, is written in the spirit of what I have tried to describe as the afterlife. Rung by rung, treading a narrow foothold, Qasmiyeh immerses himself in the chasm of the camp archive, only to emerge with a prayer of haptic hospitality amongst the dialects and the dialectics of the life world of the Badawi camp. The blessed act, I call it haptic, because the blessed act of hosting is tactile. It relates to the intimate sense of touch. And as Qasmiyeh writes and emphasizes, and I quote, "The unseen, that is the field that is there despite the eye, can only be seen by the hand. After all, the hand and not the eye is the intimate part."
I think it's really difficult to do research on migration and refugees in Africa without recognizing the coloniality of the experience, the process, the people, the way people are ranked and so on, the ordering of human beings, but also the dominance of the nation state in our approach to research and our scale of analysis. And I suppose for a decolonial approach, I would advocate a sort of feminist intersectional approach to research, looking at those intersecting layers of oppression that make finding humane solution to refugee situations difficult. The expert, as envisioned, is an outsider. It's an international person normally, and that person is supposed to be neutral. If we think about peace contexts and so on, we need a neutral expert to negotiate. So I think it comes from that thinking about the neutrality of the outsider. Right? The expert is objective, and expert knowledge becomes technical knowledge that, as I said, that can be rationalized into numbers and subsequently monetarized. But it has the potential to dehumanize. Even when experts are sensitive to context, they can treat local people as objects of study, as data points, and that, I think, contribute to that dehumanization.
And this out-of-context stories and displacement turn refugees into a mere emergency case, people who only run from a random war or a random crossfires and who deserve the international compassion, but with no referral to the cause of their displacement and their sufferings. And there's a cause. There is a cause behind all this. This representation ignores the refugees' rights to justice and accountability, their rights to hold those who cause their sufferings accountable. And as long as we claim to be objective and neutral, to just say it is a civil war, or to be grey enough to not mention the crimes of the Assad regime, or not accurately describe how all this originally started, as long as we do that, we ignore the very important rights of refugees to ask for justice. And through these rights, they only can heal and restore their lives back.
Syrian people living in Athens for the past 3 or 4 years have developed a sense of belonging that extends way beyond this time frame. They reject the tropes of refugeeness that constitute them as vulnerable victims and instead insist upon being called active citizens.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. Before I start my talk, let me begin by thanking Elena for providing Arabic translation today. The data that I'll draw on in my presentation come from my doctoral fieldwork in and around Mafraq in northern Jordan in 2016 and 17. And this was only made possible by a local Jordanian family from the Al-Amush subtribe who hosted me for a year. And they're watching right now from their living room in Mafraq. And I'm sharing this with you to emphasize that these acts of translation are not only necessary, but they're also deeply meaningful to the people we work and live with.
And this brings me to literature. I think literature is translation itself, right? What literature does is it translates that abstract experience for me through language into an experience that I can understand, I can feel, and I can live, and I can sympathize, right? And I can share.
A lot of us are much more interested, I think, in what has come out as well out of this conversation is the ways in which different kinds of knowledge are produced. And the space of art, to me, and the space of affect and haptic encounters, etc., that we were talking about, is a space of a different kind of knowledge production. And when you start to think about that, what is the kind of knowledge that art can produce? You go away from the kind of mystified, soppy associations with creativity to something that's much more fundamental because it redefines what knowledge is. It takes it away from certain kinds of instrumentalized, sequential forms of logic or forms of writing that we understand in relation to legal discourse and historical discourse, etc., into the space of writing or making, which produces equal and equally important forms of knowledge, but can't be collapsed back into those other forms of logic, temporality, etc. So I would like to take, we learn so much, a new kind of knowledge is produced in listening to Yousif's poems, which doesn't have to be translated into the language of literary criticism. We can live in the space of that knowledge and in the forms of relation that it gives us to words and people and beings and things and a situation. And that's what's so profoundly moving about it. So I would want to make a plea for art as a space of knowledge production, and as one of the ways, I'm sure there are many others, that will get us out of the trap of this kind of mystificatory language of creativity.
How would I not think of them when every being can see them as they drag themselves into the soil, the solid and the dry soil of our house? I would even say that they belong to me as much as they belong to her. The cracks in my mother's heels, those symmetrical and orderly beings, have always contributed to the way I see things, in a way that would even allow me to say that through them I can see a place that I cannot see.
But what causes people to react is the focus on the tiny detail. As you're writing, it's the heel. It's really extraordinary how across cultures and communities, different individuals in different places will find ways of telling stories of things they have observed or experienced, and they'll hone in in forms of words that have a profound point of connection.
The camp is never the same, albeit with roughly the same area. New faces, new dialects, narrower alleys, newly constructed and ever-expanding thresholds and doorsteps, intertwined clothing lines and electrical cables, well-shielded balconies, little oxygen, and impenetrable silences are all amassed in this space. The shibboleth has never been clearer and more poignant than it is now. Refugees ask other refugees, "Who are we to come to you and who are you to come to us?" Nobody answers. Palestinians, Syrians, Iraqi Kurds share the camp. The same different camp, the camp of a camp. They have all come to re-originate the beginning with their own hands and feet.